You've implemented Kubernetes. You've spent a ton of time integrating pipelines, integrating ingress controllers, monitoring, and more. But now comes the problem. As you have different pipelines introducing or deploying applications to your cluster, you have different teams and maybe different infrastructure as code tools running deployments through your clusters. Now developers, they don't really know how to support their applications. And a lot of it is because they don't understand the underlying components that Kubernetes requires to run the applications and how they're related to each other and how their services are communicating with other services. And every time they need to support their application, they come back to you because there's no real self-service type of developer experience. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how you can quickly, and by quickly I mean in just a few minutes, get all your applications discovered, regardless if they're being deployed across different CI/CD pipelines, GitOps, directly through an infrastructure as code type of automation, and give developers the visibility they need to understand and support their applications and more. Let's get it done. All right, before we go into the demo, let's talk a little bit about the scenario I have here, right? So let's say I have an AKS cluster. And in that AKS cluster, for example, I may have a system called Magento. That Magento deployment is actually in a specific namespace called Magento. And let's say in that cluster, I also have a deployment called WordPress, which is going to be located in the namespace called WordPress. I can have also a second cluster just to make it more fun, right? Where I have a GKE cluster. And in that GKE cluster, I also have Magento. Let's say Magento 2. These are all deployed across different namespaces and maybe across, as you can see here, in a different cluster as well. And this is where complexity begins, right? Because these deployments may be coming from different infrastructure as code tool. Maybe one comes with Terraform and another one is coming maybe using GitOps with Argo CD and Crossplane. And right now, my developers are in that position that they can't support their applications because they don't understand what deployment set is, volumes, and everything else comes together as part of their application. And even as you start scaling the number of applications, who owns what, right? And which developer is part of which team that can help me support in case there are problems with this application. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be signing up or using my Shipa Cloud account, which you can sign up for free. I will leave the link here. It's under apps.shipa.cloud. Again, apps.shipa.cloud. I'm going to use my Shipa Cloud account and I'm going to create a policy or a policy framework as Shipa call. I'll create framework 1, for example. And framework is the way Shipa interfaces or connects with your underlying infrastructure and exposes everything. Just one thing, I'm not going to be changing anything on my deployments or on my infrastructure. I'm simply going to be connecting Shipa as an internal developer platform or portal so my developers can see and understand their applications and help me also support these applications and teams. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to create framework 1 and I'm going to connect it to my Magento so I can discover all the applications that are located in there and expose those. I'm going to be creating another framework called framework 2, whatever name we choose it at demo time. And I'm going to be connecting to WordPress and exposing the apps. And third but not least, I'm going to be creating the last one. And guess what? I'm going to connect it to this. Awesome, right? And just by doing this, quickly connecting those frameworks to my clusters and namespaces and say, well, discover these, Shipa is going to start automatically exposing all your applications here and make it available to you and to your developers so you can get complete visibility over your apps. Let's do it. I'm logged into my Shipa Cloud account. Remember, you can sign up at apps.shipa.cloud and it's free. You can do everything I'm doing here without any cost, credit card, or whatever, right? Just sign up and get started. I'm logged into my account here. And the first step you can do, and we're not going to be covering this today, is going under user management. You can do it all using just your user ID that you sign up for Shipa, or if you want, you can create multiple teams and invite multiple users here from your development teams and create your team structure to mimic what you have from a development perspective. So as you discover these applications, you can add them and invite them all at once. This is easy, you can get it done. Happy to answer any questions you may have as you go through. But our focus will be how do we then connect Shipa to discover those applications in our cluster. We're going to be creating what we call a framework. Basically the component that I showed you before that connects Shipa to your underlying cluster. You can do more with the frameworks. Basically, Shipa uses frameworks for two things. One, to create policies and enforce these policies on applications that are deployed by your development teams. And this is also Shipa's way of connecting to your underlying cluster and exposing the applications that you have there, which is the goal we have for today. If you click on frameworks and then create, you're going to see different options here, like deploy applications with reasonable defaults. This is Shipa exposing, Shipa connecting to your cluster and exposing a way for you to get applications, or an API to get applications deployed easily. You can define detailed policies as well. So detailed policies are enforced as applications are deployed. Those are two different options. We can discuss them later, but today we're going to be talking about discover existing applications. Remember, our goal is just to connect to our cluster and expose these as applications, right? All these services deployed, so we can get this over to our development teams. If you click on next, you're going to find basic stuff. You're going to find information about name, plan, resource plan. Nothing is being enforced at this moment, but it will be applied and can be applied later, so you can see how applications that are in your cluster diverge from the resources that you want them to consume. But again, this is another topic. First one, I'm going to be doing Magento, let's say, project 1, right? This is going to be the name of this framework or this policy that I want to connect to my cluster and discover first my Magento apps. Here, I'm going to have to tell Shipa, okay, what's the namespace that you want to connect to in my cluster to discover these applications? If I'm not mistaken, if we come here and I do kubectl get namespace, I have my Magento app or my Magento namespace in here. And if I do get pods, Magento, I can see these pods. The goal is not to have or to remove the need to give my developers kubectl access, right? Or access into my cluster and give them visibility over. So me as a DevOps, I still have access over everything. But now giving my developers a way to access it. So we can just come in here and say Magento. And we're going to select Shipa plan. Again, don't spend too much time on that. We can talk about it later. And the teams that you want to give access to, right? That's the part where you have already defined the teams and the users for those teams that you want to add and give visibility over these apps. In my case, I'll just select Shipa team. It's a default. I'm the only one. Next is going to ask me to enter a label. So for the label, Shipa needs to identify, Shipa uses the label to identify the applications that you want to be discovered. If I go back here and I select my apps, I can do describe pod, my Elasticsearch master, for example, pod. If I come to the labels here, I can see app Kubernetes. I can see app Kubernetes.io instance, Magento, for example. If I do kubectl describe pod, and I describe another pod, my MariaDB pod, for example, I can see the same label is applied to all the pods related to Magento, right? And they all have the same label. So I can use that as a common label that Shipa can use to discover your applications. If you deploy your applications using Helm or other methodology, most likely you already have labels assigned to it that you can use. So I'm going to be using this one. And if we go back to Shipa and we do this, and tell this is the label that you want it to use, and I can add Magento, I can maybe add project 1. for example. So every application or everything that is discovered by Shipa, just add project 1 as a suffix. Done. Awesome. Then I'll create it. All right, my Magento Project 1 framework is created and available here, but nothing is happening because I haven't connected it to my cluster. That's when I can come into clusters and click on create. You can see that because I have this framework free and not connected to any cluster, it auto selects for me. And the next step for me is to enter my Kubernetes control plane, which is basically your cluster API. If I come in here, I have this here. I can just copy it. Don't bother trying to replicate or do anything because by the time you watch this video, it's gone. And as soon as I enter my Kubernetes control plane address and click on the button, it gives me the command to connect Shipa. How cool and easy is that? If I come in here to my terminal again and I do the kubectl apply, it's basically going to download or it's going to apply Shipa's agent to your cluster and start connecting Shipa to your cluster. If I do kubectl, get pods, Shipa, for example, you can see that it creates a Shipa namespace and starts deploying a Shipa agent and all the services related to Shipa.
Now we just have to wait.
All right, now you can see that all my services are running. And if you're connecting your cluster for the first time, it should take between 1 and 2 minutes max. And you can see these pods and the process going on from a DevOps side. But it should take you between 60 to 120 seconds max. If we go back to Shipa now, we can say we're done. And we go to applications. What happened? What happened? We can see our Magento Project 1 application is right here. Ooh. So if you click on it, you see the status of your application, of your Magento app. There, right? My finger's not gonna go. And from here now, you can start seeing who owns this, right? Which team it belongs to, which namespace this is connected to, what type of resource plan later you can see if it diverges from what you defined. You can see the container images that this project is running. So you can see, well, there's an Elasticsearch here or 2 Elasticsearch, MariaDB and others. So now easily your developers can understand what container images, or you can understand what container images and versions are deployed. You can see all the environment variables that this project or my Magento is actually running. Awesome, right? You can see all the endpoints where my Magento is actually exposed. So if I want, I can just basically get one of these and test if you want to. Oh, here's my load balancer, for example. If I just copy this and I test, ta-da, I can access my Magento. So you can quickly see what type of exposure you have from an ingress and egress capability. From here, if there are auto-scale rules set for your application, you can see, and also the config maps that are added. So now you have visibility over how the service comes together and developers can finally see it, right? Soon enough, you're gonna start seeing transactions coming, resources. You can see how this is actually distributed from a unit perspective. So I can see my Magento, Elasticsearch, DB, and so on available here. And in case you're running a multi-region, you can see where these units are located. More than that, now you can see the relationship, and it's a ton in here. You can see all the objects that are related to your Magento app. So you can see, yeah, this is the Magento app that I access. Oops, magic mouse. My Magento app, right, that I access online. And here are all the pods and images that are related to my cluster. The status, or not to my cluster, to my Magento app, the status and the details of everything. So when there is a problem, now your developer can easily understand why their application is not available, and if it's a problem with the pod, or if it's a problem with the service, and so on. Nice, right? What have I changed in my cluster? Zero. Didn't touch anything from a cluster perspective. I just get this instantly. The other part as well is my network map. It's crazy, right? And you know why this is showing like this? Because here you can see it easily that your application is basically sending both ingress and egress to everything. So if this is a production system, basically your application is at risk at this point, and someone has to fix it, right? And also, if your service cannot communicate with other service as you apply network policies to your app, this is going to be reflected right here. Awesome. Nice. Just a few minutes, you get this available to you. How nice. Okay, so part 2 now. Let's say my AKS cluster. I also have kubectl, get namespace, for example. I also have a WordPress installed in here. And if I do get pods, WordPress, I see my 2 containers. Basically my WordPress UI and my MariaDB. Great. So how do we surface this application again? It's in the same cluster, different namespaces, right? So what I'm going to be doing is going back to the process we did before. I'm going to go to frameworks, and I can say create a framework, discover existing applications, and I'm going to say WordPress project X, for example. Same thing, I'm going to select Shipa plan as the resource, and here I'm going to give the name of the namespace that you want Shipa to connect to discover these apps. And a team, I'll do Shipa team. Again, here you can select the teams that you want to give visibility over the apps that you discover so they can get instant access to it. And because this cluster is already connected to Shipa, I can come here and I can say, I can pick this one, which is the cluster where this is connected. If I click on next, it's gonna give me, just like before, the label. If we do kubectl describe pod, and I do my WordPress, in my WordPress namespace, going up, I can see there is a managed by Helm, or there is one called name, for example. Let's see if it is the same. Get pods, kubectl describe pod. Let's see, MariaDB, just to make sure we get one that is common between both. Yeah, I can get managed by, for example. Whatever you choose. I can come here and I can select this and add this, and I'll say project X, WP project X, right? And I'll do create. This is gonna do basically 2 things, right? It's gonna, if we go to events, you're gonna see that there is an additional event. It's not only creating the framework this time, but it is also connecting this framework to your cluster. All right, the process finished, and if we head over to applications, I see my application here, but it should take 30, 60 seconds. As soon as the controller starts discovering the apps, you should see your app running here. And the same way as my Magento project, if I go inside my Helm project, I'll see the container images deployed, all the environment variables for this, the endpoints where my application is actually exposed, and config maps, autoscale, and everything in between that is related to your application, transactions, resources, and others as traffic starts coming in, how they're distributed. Also the dependency map, this one less crowded because there's less objects, so you can see all the objects related to your app and the status again. And once more, the network map, so how your application is actually communicating with services within the namespace and across different namespaces, right? Because this is actually showing that everything is exposed, for example, and like I mentioned before, if you apply a network policy to this app, Shipa will automatically show it there. So you want to give it a try? Let's see it really quick. If we come in here and we do vi network.yaml, for example, and I say this is my network policy, my match labels, I'll get it in a second. WordPress is my namespace, that's right. Let me see, kubectl get pods, WordPress, describe pod, for example. Instance WordPress. Very clever, very clever. If I come in here and I just add this, oops. All right, and I do kubectl, apply network YAML. It created the network policy. And doing a refresh, I can now see my WordPress is not accepting ingress from anywhere, but egress is still out there. So it just reflected my new network policy. So you can see everything that is happening. Of course, this is probably not the right policy, but you get the idea, right? I hope that was helpful, and how you can easily give your developers a developer platform or developer portal where they can quickly understand the applications, again, without changing anything in your cluster. See you in the next video.